Hello, statistically more likely to be male audience. God, have I got a sentence you'll like? Uber, but for blowjobs. And the crowd goes wild. You're gonna love this. Uber, but for I'll say it again. Uber, but for blowjobs. It's for blowjobs now. Make it for blowjobs. Genuinely, most of the sentence "Uber for blowjobs" is already a fairly well discussed idea. It's just legalizing sex work or prostitution, either one. I'm not a language stickler. Comment below that I used the wrong word to describe believing in the right thing. So, generally speaking, when people advocate for legalization or decriminalization, those are two different things, but we'll get into that in a minute, of sex work, the terms within which they do so are feminist terms. They make it sort of the type of thing that can only appeal to a niche audience, really. Well, maybe these days it has a broader audience now, because you've got a lot more OnlyFans people, a lot more young women on OnlyFans, and so that creates a sort of a broader demographic of people who are, at least in some way, touching the world of selling sex, and by extension of touching that world, there's a broader base of support for the issue now. So that could potentially be a good thing if you're an activist on this front. But very rarely is discussed the other end. I'm going to make the case from the other side. I'm going to make the case from the client side. And I think we know why that case doesn't get made, right? Because it's a little icky. You're basically just saying, man, but I want to buy blowjobs. Why won't the government let me buy blowjobs? But I've spoken to sex work decriminalization activists, and one of the things I've heard from real people who do this in real life is that they find it a little bit upsetting the way that some feminists, mostly on the Nordic model camp, which if you don't know, one of the positions on sex work is called the Nordic model. And what they basically say is that we should legalize the selling of sex, but not the purchasing of sex. And this model is criticized by many sex work people because it still sort of drives things underground. It still means that there's a lot of policing surrounding the issue of selling sex, which ends up contributing to the same exact problems that they were concerned about in the first place, where people who sell sex, who maybe they've been sex trafficked, maybe they want to get out, maybe they're doing it because they're poor, they need access to resources, can't get those things because they're afraid to come forward because they're going to get arrested for it. So, I've talked to some people in real life, and they've said that one of the things that they hate about that Nordic model, about the rhetoric surrounding that, is the intense degree to which it stigmatizes their clients. And a lot of these people that I've spoken to will say, I like my clients. My clients are always very nice and respectful towards me. Theoretically, there are terrible, brutal, misogynistic men who could come in and just be like, fuck me, whore, or whatever. But my understanding is that there are a lot of people who are happy doing this work, and they don't mind their clients. So, given that, maybe part of advocating for this issue, even from that feminist perspective, is making a client's case. Making a case that these men buying sex are not all disgusting, horrible pigs. Also, this is a much less technical, activisty thing to say. Wouldn't it be nice to have an Uber for blowjobs? Wouldn't that be nice, fellas? Wouldn't that be nice, boys? Yeah, let's turn to the other side here. Incels. That's been a thing. That's been a thing in the discourse lately. And I think there's a lot of attempts on the left to make male loneliness and sexual frustration into just loneliness and sexual frustration. They don't want it to be a specifically male issue because they don't want to kind of give that to men. You know, men are the oppressor group within feminism, right? And women are the oppressed group. So they don't want to give them that. They don't want to give them a thing that makes them kind of seem like they're the oppressed group, even in a specific scenario and with a specific issue. And they don't want to make it gendered because they don't want it to be sort of biologically essentialist. I'll be honest, I'm pretty biologically essentialist. I definitely don't think that men and women have exactly the same sexual desires and evolutionary psychologies. But I'm not going to try and change anybody's mind about that at this point. I've learned to pick my battles a little bit here. I don't think I'm going to change anyone's mind about the degree to which men and women think differently on the internet at this point. But I do think that the issue of male loneliness in particular is different from female loneliness. Even if it's all socialized, at the moment, in this cultural moment, it is fundamentally different. And one of the reasons that it's different is because if you are a woman and you're very, very lonely, if you are what incels call a femcel, you've probably got options in terms of casual sex. You've probably got options on that front. You could probably go on the internet and find a random man to have casual sex with. If you are a woman and you feel that you don't have those options, boy, have I got some news for you. I've got some nudes you might like to meet. So you probably have options on that front. So really, your issue then is that you don't have any good men or any men you'd like to start a relationship with. And that's not the same problem. Being wanted sexually, but not wanting them, and being lonely as a result of that, is not the same problem as being completely unwanted. It's not the same. And also, for a lot of guys, they wouldn't mind something completely short-term or casual. I think there's a lot of stigma and holdover on casual sex in general from a more conservative time. And we just kind of have chosen not to do away with that more conservative sort of stigma when it comes to men, because I think women find use in leaving that stigma around to sort of put a check on like sexually aggressive men. And so men being open about wanting casual sex is not nearly as destigmatized in the modern day as women being open about it. And I do think that for a lot of guys, having something that is very casual, that is maybe not as good as being in love with a woman that you love, but that can hold you over to some extent in the short term, is a very valuable thing. I also think that there is a such thing as like sex therapy as a form of sex work, and I think it's possible that if men had access to that more short-sighted form of no strings attached sex by being able to pay for sex, I think that could build up a lot of dudes' confidence. Because I think there's something about going in, some of these people literally as a virgin, that could really degrade your confidence. If you go in having seen some kind of a sex therapist and kind of learned some techniques or what have you, you might feel a little bit better because you're a little bit more confident in your ability to get someone off, let's say. So, a lot of times, the rhetoric surrounding this issue, I think, is terrible on the left. I see a lot of liberals saying things like, incels don't really want sex, they want love. I mean, maybe sometimes, I don't know, don't we all want love, right? Probably, like most of us. But some of us also want sex. You can want both of those things in separate ways. So now let's get into the discussion of how would one make it happen? How does one make Uber for blowjobs a reality? Because this is a pressing issue. This is a pressing issue. This isn't one of those dumb issues like civil rights or freedom of speech. No, this is the important stuff. This is blowjob Uber. Okay? How does one make it happen? How does one make it a reality? Well, the short answer is sex work legalization, but that's not a perfect answer. Because a lot of the people advocating for sex workers advocate decriminalization. Now, decriminalization could potentially lead to an Uber for blowjobs, but it wouldn't be an official business. It wouldn't have recognition, and that might lead, I assume, to some hurdles in terms of financing and investment. So the odds that you would ever get anything with the kind of overhead of an Uber or something like that, I kind of doubt that with a decriminalization model. There are also some problems, I would say, with the decriminalization model. Like, one of the reasons you might advocate for a legalization model is because it turns it into an industry like any other industry. And you don't want, probably, your hot dog vendors, unless you're an anarcho-capitalist, in which case maybe you do, you don't want your hot dog vendors to have absolutely no health and safety regulations on them, probably, right? And that is more or less what is being discussed when we discuss sex work decriminalization. Because obviously we're talking about zero consequences for things surrounding sex work, which would also potentially mean allowing sex workers to advertise freely, also maybe to children, right? Because there would be no rules, really. Legalization creates a set of rules and a set of consequences for those rules. So you can have health and safety regulations which require people to wear condoms or use birth control or other things like that so that it's not STD ridden, right? Which I think would be good for reducing stigma and so on. People feeling confident that they know that this is not something that makes you all dirty and STD filled, right? And if you do that, then there is going to be some portion of the population, and potentially this portion of the population is very, very poor, who goes out and does sex work without following those rules and regulations, and then gets in trouble and gets arrested. And that's sort of the fear, is that when you do legalization, you end up with a two-tiered model where there's this above-ground, legal, allowed sex work, and there's this underground sex work that's still getting criminalized. And so it doesn't fully stop the criminalization, and it doesn't fully solve the problem of driving things underground in such a way that it prevents, say, sex trafficking victims from coming forward and trying to get resources, or people who are in this trade who do not want to be, who are living in poverty, from coming forward and getting resources. I feel, though, that you could probably say that about literally any industry. So maybe there's sort of an in-between that we haven't quite found. Legalize decriminalization, minimize punishments for the very poorest, but still maintain some kind of authority and punishment for, industry for industrial scale sex work. There is probably ways we could do that in general, like, the hot dog cart on the corner of the street maybe doesn't need to face the same kind of regulatory standards as McDonald's. Small business owner hot dog cart maybe doesn't need the same level of punishment as a massive corporation. So there are ways to sort of create a gradient between legalization and decriminalization, and I think something like that gradient would probably be the best approach. But from like an activist perspective, you have to build a broad base. So as long as you're with either one of these things, you're with it, I think. I think legalization, decriminalization, as long as you're with either one of those things, because they're both an improvement upon the status quo, both from a feminist perspective and from a I would like a blowjob, please perspective. So, yeah, I think it would be great. I think it would be also very modern and convenient. There's a reason I threw in the word Uber in there, is because I think it would be great to get this on a modern level. I think there's a lot of anger on the right now. I know, because I'm tapped into it, I think more than the vast majority of people on the left. There's a lot of anger on the right about porn. A lot of young men, myself included, are very, very unhappy psychologically with being alienated and not having a lot of community and spending a lot of their time watching porn that they'll never live out. And I think it's weird that historically, like, conservatism puts paying for sex in the same category as, like, gambling and drinking and drugs and all this other stuff. Puts it in the degeneracy category, right? Well, most of that degeneracy stuff is addictive. Right? Social media is addictive. Porn is addictive. Alcohol is addictive. Gambling is addictive. I kind of feel like having sex with real people in the real world is human and de-alienating in a way that 90% of the activities we do are not. So I actually think we live in an era where from like a anti-degeneracy perspective, you could make a case for sex work, that sex work is actually the opposite of the degeneracy of porn. That having real sex in the real world is the opposite of sitting in your bedroom watching something you'll never take part in.